Good evening, everyone. So my name is Adrian Wilson, and as Elizabeth said, thank you, Elizabeth. I'm a research officer at Nature Seekers in Matura. And for those that aren't aware, we generally go a little bit more into what Nature Seekers try to do and accomplish. But the discussion today is particularly around a research that we conducted over the past year, so that would have been 2023, or the 2023 nesting season, whereby we utilized the Matrice 300 RTK, and the plan behind it was really to try to see how feasible it is to utilize the thermal imagery or the thermal imagery capability of the drone in supporting beach monitoring and along the nesting site. So the project was done in collaboration with the University of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Dinesh Ramswak, for his GIS expertise. And so today we'll present the findings. But before we go into that, I want to talk a bit about just Nature Seekers in general and where we started. So I know the images have been graphic, so I can click the next slide if anybody can't look at it for too long. However, back in the early 1980s, and based on what Ms. Elizabeth just presented, even prior to that, this was a common sight along the beach in Matura. Slaughtered leatherbacks, they were slaughtered for their meat, they were slaughtered for their eggs, they were slaughtered just for the purpose of being slaughtered. And back then it was a really different time in terms of what Nature Seekers would have had to do while on the beach. It was physical fights with poachers and really trying to protect the sea turtle while still being able to collect the relevant data. Over the years, however, that has since changed. We have not had an instance of poaching on Matura Beach recorded for at least within the past 12 years. So now Nature Seekers' focus has shifted a bit. Yes, while we're still looking at sea turtle conservation, we've shifted a bit to more science and research. So within recent years, we started a lot of satellite telemetry where we track these sea turtles after they leave Trinidad and Tobago to see where they would go. And from that, we were able to figure out that, most of our turtles, or the turtles that we encounter nesting here, head north to Canada, Nova Scotia, Halifax area. And as of recent years, there's a small population that's been formed in Florida, or the coast of Florida. So you can see from the green track there, that one turtle that is headed back to that Florida region, and the blue track, which most of the tracks that we get, that's what it's going to look like, they head back to Canadian waters. Outside of that, we started a lot of additional science and research. So we're doing currently a nest box project where we relocate at-risk nests off the beach if we aren't able to find a suitable place on the beach due to erosion, sargassum, and other issues, and we place them in these artificial hatcheries. And after hatching, we then do the release to get them back out to the sea. We have an extensive sea turtle weighing program where we weigh a number of turtles throughout the season just to get an idea of fitness, of reproductive health, and comparing that to the number of eggs that they output. And most recently, we started looking at just weather data or meteorological data around the nesting site to see how that impacts anything from nesting to hatching success. So it's a whole lot of research and data collection that's going on around sea turtles at Matura. But I digress a little bit, so I'll get back to what we came to talk about today. Most recently, or last year rather, we started this project with respect to TIR, or thermal infrared imagery. And just to kind of get everyone acquainted to what the project would have looked like, just play a short clip. And during the clip, I want you to try to count as many leatherbacks as you can from the clip. It's a bit lengthy, I might stop it halfway. It's probably going to take us to around the end of this clip. And this would have summed up what we would do nightly when we went out to the beach with the drone. So we would have the drone pilot looking at his remote, and this is actually just screen recording of the remote. So this is exactly what the drone pilot would have been seeing. So the pilot would be flying the drone, he would have one person there assisting him so that he could either swap batteries or communicate with the field team. So as soon as he spotted a turtle, if you look to the bottom, I guess that's your left of the screen, you will see little markers that say zone 18, zone 17, zone 16. And that's because Matura Beach is broken into 18 zones. And it's really a lot for location sharing as well. So the drone pilot would see, hey, I have 2 turtles nested in the upper part or the lower part of zone 16, 17. And he could now have a patrol or a ranger go to that area to actually ground truth and confirm, okay, yeah, what you're seeing on the remote is actually a leatherback. And yeah, she is actually laying or she's camouflaging or whatever she's doing. So that's the process that we would have walked through. And just for a little background on what we're actually seeing, it's called TIR, thermal infrared radiation. And basically any living object or anything that gives off heat it gives off this radiation that we can see through different sensors. So the drone's payload or the camera has a sensor that can pick up this. So instead of just seeing regular red, green, blue, orange, whatever colors, it sees it as this. And the pic here really demonstrates 2 things. So the white would be closer to hot, and the black would be closer to cold. So you can see the sand in the center, you have the Atlantic Ocean on one side, and you have the forest on the other side. And as the leatherbacks or the turtles come up, they get sand on them. They are generally white because they're warmer. They move the top sand and you realize you start to see that below layer of white sand because the sand below is a little bit warmer. So this is what the project really tried to attain, to figure out if it actually makes sense to utilize this method to support sea turtle conservation. So just a bit about the nesting site. It's Matura Beach, and for anyone who isn't familiar with the location, it's along the east coast of Trinidad. It's north of Manzanilla, north of Fishing Pond, just south of Celebia Beach or Sailing Bay. And it's a stretch of beach that covers 8.8 kilometers. There are a few rivers or estuaries that exit here. So you have, to the south of the beach, we have the Oropouche River. Just to the center, we have the Matura River exit on that side as well. The site facilitates 3 very often of the 5 sea turtle species that we see in Trinidad. So we have the leatherback turtles, we have the green turtles, and the hawksbills. We see those 3 very commonly nesting at least. Occasionally we see olive ridleys. We've seen at least 2 within the last year, and even more rare, the loggerheads. That's the 5th, right? So Matura Beach, for anyone who's been here, you realize that it's just open Atlantic. So it's a long stretch of beach, 8.8 kilometers in length, and it's open ocean, so there's high wind and wave energy that hits this beach consistently. And I mention these things because these are all factors that we had to consider when trying to figure out what's the best device to procure. Because a device that cannot withstand the wind speed is either not going to survive because the battery life would just die really quickly, or it just won't be able to give you that accurate positioning based on the wind. So we decided to go with this device particularly because of the ratings in terms of being able to handle wind speeds. They say up to 15 meters per second, but we've flown in higher wind speeds, and just the battery life from one pair of batteries, you can get somewhere between 35 to 45 minutes of flight time. So that was enough time to cover 1/2 of the beach. We would land, swap the batteries, and continue the flight to finish the second half of the beach. So we generally would run these flights 4 times a night, every 2 hours, so 8 p.m., 10 p.m., 12 a.m., 2 a.m., and we would count as many turtles as we could see during that time period. So just to point out a few other things along the beach and why we would have gone with the device or why we decided to try this is that there's the length of the beach, there's the wind and the waves, and then there are also a lot of small rivers that sometimes exit onto the beach during the rainy season. And those things all cause, while it's a natural movement of the beach, they bring about issues with them for sea turtle monitoring at least. So the length of the beach means that we require either a lot of patrols or a little bit of patrols to do a lot of walking, one of the two. So ideally, we would like to have 2 patrols per zone, and at 18 zones, that's 36 patrols. And that's a lot of volunteer work or a lot of finances for persons if they have to be paid for the work. And coming out of that, the erosion in certain areas along the beach makes it difficult for patrols to go and come. So sometimes you might be on the beach, but because it's so eroded, at high tide, the wave is hitting the backshore, it's really not safe to either send patrols up because tide might be still coming up, or if you have tours and that sort of stuff, it's not safe to pass in those locations. And then of course you have the rivers that the river mouth changes, which present the same issue. So the drone is now assisting in being able to cover areas along the beach that we're unable to send patrols to, and still able to at least, you may not be able to tag a turtle, but at least have some idea of how many turtles are nesting within a given space along the beach, or if there's nothing happening there at all. We required a drone with specific capabilities, so we needed a rugged device to combat the wind. We needed that long-range connectivity because of the length of the beach, so that the pilot didn't have to stop, walk, launch again every 2 kilometers. We also needed the capacity or capability to carry the payload. And those are the few things that we put together when we were looking for a device. And this list is here particularly to say that whatever monitoring it is that you're deciding to do, it may not be sea turtle monitoring, but the considerations must be put in place with respect to what is the purpose of the device, what are the conditions you're going to be using the device within before actually just selecting to say, okay, yeah, I'm going to buy this device or I'm going to buy that device. So we spoke about the methodology a little bit already, but what we did is that, as I said, we conducted 4 flights nightly, and we did this for 3 nights every week during the peak of the season, and I think we did it from the months of April to June. That's when we tend to get the highest amount of nesting numbers, and during that time of the season, we were able to then come up with a mental protocol of how we would assess whatever we saw. So, first of all, we would look for the morphological features of whatever object we saw. We can't see the turtle yet because we don't know. So we try to figure out, okay, do I see a head? Do I see a flipper? Do I see a carapace? And once we, okay, maybe that's a turtle, we then look to see, are there any tracks around that specific object that could suggest it moved from the ocean to above the high tide line. And that would kind of give us an idea, all right, so yeah, maybe it's a turtle because I'm seeing some tracks. And we would then, post-flight, we could look at the images to see the width of the track or the type of the track, because of course different sea turtles have different types of tracks based on how they move their flippers. And we could kind of say, okay, well, yeah, that's definitely a leatherback, or okay, maybe that's a hawksbill, maybe that's a green. Unfortunately, and I would say we did not get many hawksbills and greens throughout the time of the study, so it's difficult to say that we're, okay, able to distinguish between the smaller or the hard shells. But certainly with respect to the leatherback turtles, it was a clear indicator from the time you saw them, okay, yeah, that's definitely a leatherback. We did come across one hawksbill and we were able to measure the track, and it was a clear difference. I think that is the image on the bottom of my right, your left. So I'm sure if everybody could see that. So the leatherback track was roughly around between 6 and 7 feet in width, while a smaller track of the hawksbill was just around 3 to 4 feet in width. So just by looking at the track of the back, you can tell, okay, that's not a leatherback, or maybe that is. And that's the sort of the protocol that we use every time we came across a turtle. Across the period, we were able to we were able to count or identify about 686 leatherbacks from videos and just counts from all of the collection and that we put together. We realized that the drone was definitely successful in increasing the efficiency of the patrols for the rangers. So we were able to move from just saying, okay, John, tonight you're in zone 1 and 2. Sheila, tonight you're in zone 3 and 4, to say, guys, we're noticing heavier nesting numbers in zone 5 and 6. So John, you're in 5 and 6 tonight. Sheila, I saw a lot happening in 7 and 8. We're putting you a bit tonight. So we were able to optimize the workforce and really go where the turtles were nesting to get the maximum output from the patrols and the most data that we could have gathered, as opposed to just arbitrarily placing patrols along the coastline. We were able to sometimes tell at what stage a turtle was in the nesting phase. So if you stopped and you looked a little bit, zoomed in, you could kind of assess, all right, she looks like she's digging. You could see whether she had sand on her carapace already, because that sand had a little bit of heat to it, so it was a lot whiter than the regular dark dead sand. So there were a lot of outcomes that we were able to pick up from just looking at the footage. And finally, we were able to provide a lot of material for education and outreach. So now, going into schools, doing outreach, anywhere we go, we're able to show these images, and it tends to bring excitement, especially within the school system and the children, and they're excited about all the black and white images. So this slide here is a bit of a collage with respect to some of the images and some of the things that we were able to see that weren't really reported. So I could try to point out a few of them. So if you look at the image to the bottom right, we're seeing 3 patrols surrounding some lines on the ground. So we were able to even detect hatchling tracks coming out from a nest. So that's this photo right down there. And we were able to pick up that on drone. Unfortunately, we didn't actually spot any hatchlings to really say with any amount of certainty that, okay, we could actually even spot hatchlings. Yeah, but this provides some sort of insight and support when we're looking at the educational ecotourism side of things, that the drone can be used within that aspect. We saw turtles of all shapes and sizes in different locations. The third image from the bottom on the right side here as well shows a clear image of a leatherback turtle that was camouflaging, and you could sort of see directly that, hey, there's no other sea turtle that looks like that, even from a black and white image. So it was clearly definitive with respect to stopping and zooming in what you could see. Just to track back a bit for any of the drone pilots or drone users that we have here, and talk a bit about the flight itself. So the flight was done from 200 feet, so that's just about 60 meters, give or take. So that's the general flight height of all of the video that you saw, the images. It was an automated flight, so we would just set it up, run the flight, and then look at it as the flight was taking place, or we would also try to process some of the images to look at them afterwards. Talk a bit about what didn't work so well. It really wasn't all perfect. We had issues with connectivity. So while the manufacturer rating says that there's a 15-kilometer range between the drone and the remote, we noticed that at nights where there was heavy wind and sea spray, that connectivity dwindled or dropped to somewhere around between 5 and 6 kilometers, although we had almost a clear line of sight of the device. So it required the pilot at times to just sort of adjust sometimes, walk out, stretch in the air, just to ensure that he retained connection with the drone, else the flight would just kind of cancel and the drone would return to home. And the weather conditions were also an issue, and I guess this is the same with drones in general. Again, there was a IP, I think 43 rated, which suggests that the drone could take a little bit of wetting, spray and a little bit of rain for up to 3 minutes. We did not test that. Once we figured out that, okay, rain is probably going to fall, or there was a forecast of rain, we would cancel the flights for that night and just conduct our regular patrols. And the low light situations. Matura Beach has no artificial lighting, so for nights where the moonlight was not present, the drone has a feature, more or less, object avoidance, where based on what is in front of it, it will stop or just cancel the flight, and any night that feature was not available. Yeah, so on nights where, that's why we chose the height of that 60 meters to ensure that we were clearly above the tree line, because again, the object avoidance feature was more or less disabled at within those low light situations. And then we also had some challenges, and I want to mention this one particularly with respect to managing perception. So there's the going idea now that robots are taking over, there's AI, and there are drones now. And when going into smaller communities and even rural communities, you have to be very clear in the communication as to what exactly you're doing. Because persons may have the idea that, well, you're no longer going to need patrols and you're going to remove jobs. And that is certainly not the plan behind utilizing the drone. So communication with residents and communities to really explain to them what is happening so that they don't have the perception that you want to remove persons from doing the job because we now have a drone that can do it. The drone is here particularly to support the conservation work. It needs to have ground truthing done. You need to have foot patrols on the ground in order to really confirm anything that you see from the drone particularly. And quite frankly, the drone is still unable to tag, to read a flipper tag, to read a pit tag, or to do anything across those lines. So it really is just a tool within the toolkit for sea turtle monitoring, or rather it can be a tool within the toolkit for sea turtle monitoring, and it's not meant to replace the traditional method of foot patrols. And then drone maintenance. Being in the sailing environment, that's something to be considered because you have a lot of salt, and without a rigid maintenance program, the drone, it's not going to last very long. Thankfully, a lot of this drone is fiberglass, but there are still the electrical components and all the metal pieces that are inside of it that is prone to corrosion. So without a rigid maintenance schedule, the lifespan that you could get out of the device, you probably are not going to get it. So those are just two things I've mentioned. And also, flying in the beach environment, landing and takeoff, sometimes you're going to have sand when you have that downwash from the copters or the rotors. So that's also something to consider. I mean, we were very cheap about it. We used a carpet, 1 meter by 1 meter carpet, put out on the ground, the drone would land on that and take off from there. So no need to purchase expensive landing pad or cast a concrete base or anything along that line. And coming out of it, we were able to recognize some potential advancements or things that would make the drone a lot more suited for remote monitoring, especially of beaches that are difficult to access. So the possibility of a payload that can scan pit tags, and just for reference of persons who aren't aware, this is currently how we scan a pit tag. So this is a pit tag scanner, and the pit tag is really just a tag inside of this needle, the size of a rice grain, that we inject into the shoulder muscle of the turtle, and it just gives it a unique ID. So if there was a way to have this device onto a payload, then that would be great. But that comes with its fair share of issues because this device gives off an electromagnetic signal, and this device requires electromagnetics in order to navigate. So you have a fair share of issues taking place there. But it really would revolutionize how we're able to monitor the movement of these sea turtles around the country on beaches that are not considered as index beaches or important nesting sites for turtles. However, we do have sea turtles nesting there, and knowledge of their movement would assist in seeing the bigger picture of where leatherback, or how the leatherback population is growing or declining within our country. The introduction of AI technology to count these images or the objects within the images. Looking through these videos and counting all 686 of these turtles was not the easiest task, and it took a lot of time. So while, yes, we were able to do it while actively in the field, having to sit down afterwards and go through the collection of data and images was a necessary thing just to make sure you didn't really miss anything in the field, which is possible because the drone is moving at a sort of a speed, right? So if there was, or not if, there is AI technology that can be integrated to be able to just sort of pull out these counts, then that would take things to another level. And then the ability to do suitability assessment for nest relocation. So I mentioned earlier that we have areas along the beach that are eroding, we have areas that are inundated with sargassum every year. So the plan is to have the photos of the beach across the year or across a few years to be able to tell areas on the beach that are most stable and most suitable to relocate nests on the beach as opposed to having to move them off the beach into artificial hatcheries. So to close, I'll just say that the drones generally can be an integral part of sea turtle monitoring. And again, I would stress on the fact can be a part of sea turtle monitoring and not can be sea turtle monitoring. It has to complement, or it should certainly complement existing the community engagement that is necessary in sea turtle conservation. So taking the community out of the conservation is not going to propel things. While it might be a faster way or a more modern way of doing things, the community participation is integral. It's the most important part to the sea turtle conservation work that is being done. There is the potential to optimize the workforce, however, where funding is limited, which is usually the case with most of the sea turtle programs around the country. There's only so much voluntary work that a group can do, and due to the time frame of sea turtle monitoring, it gets kind of difficult. So to have a consistent data set, you need consistent monitoring, and you need persons on the beach consistently between the hours of 7 p.m. and 5 a.m., 6 a.m. sometimes, which is difficult to ask of persons if they aren't, or if they have to wake up the next morning to, I don't know, go to work, sit behind a computer and stay awake. It can support other areas of operations within these small organizations. So while you're using the drone for just sea turtle monitoring, there are lots of other ways the drone could support the organization, and it might just justify being able to put out the upfront capital that is required to purchase the drone. However, I will add finally that the beach dynamics, the conservation strategy, the conservation goal must be taken into consideration when selecting a device. It shouldn't just be, oh, this is a new device, this could do X, this could do Y, this could do Z. Let's purchase this for our program. We need to take into consideration what we're trying to do and what we want to get out of it before we actually go on to purchase a drone or a device. So that ends the formal part of the presentation. Right, so this is just four of the major work that we would have referenced within here. Just four of them. However, we looked at a number of other research projects, particularly one that was done in Costa Rica, where they utilized TRI images as well to monitor olive ridleys. And we sort of built on the work that was done there and translated it into what would be necessary for leatherback monitoring. So these are just funders and contributors to the work that's done. So we have Adrian Wilson, which is the major funder, purchaser of the drone. They support a lot of the work that we're doing with respect to sea turtle conservation, UTT, the research work that was done in collaboration with them, and of course EMA and forestry provided any necessary permissions to actually go out to the beach to get the work done.
So Adrian, I saw the post of nature seekers when you went to Thailand to present this, and I saw it that when contacting nature seekers to have you come and present this because I mean the TTFNC project was close to the club's heart back
Yeah.
then, and it's still a big part of the club history. And to see how far, that this has come, it's really fascinating. And the drone is actually, pretty cool. Pretty cool piece of equipment we have there, and it's really, it's really showing us how far conservation has come and now we could do even more. So on behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you for a very interesting, very cool presentation, and thank you for taking your time, even with the day change and everything, to still be here and to present to all of us. I think we all appreciated the information.